Gracias. Buenos días. ¿Cómo están? Estaba en Perú para 2 semanas, so no puedo pagar el español. So we're going to do this one in Spanish. Is that all right? So I just got back from Peru 2 days ago. I was there for 2 weeks with my family. It wasn't really a vacation. It was more of 2 weeks with your family. But we had a good time, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So just kind of as way of introduction, what I want to talk about is the use of the web in education and how do we utilize it? How do we use technology in the web? I am the global education evangelist for Google. I've been with Google for about 7.5 years. And I've been working in the education space for about 5 of those years, when launching Google Apps for Education into university spaces, and then K-12, and then Chromebooks, and then YouTube, and all these other things that we're doing in this space. So I want to talk about that. Before I get started, contact information. As my daughter says, emails for old people. And how she knows where I am is either through Twitter or Google+, and that's how she keeps track of where I am. So I'm on Twitter. I post a lot of things around things that we're doing in education, articles that are interesting, observations of things, questions. So if you have a question for me and that I can't answer, I usually just post it or retweet it and then get an answer like in 5 seconds from someone else. So it's a great way to kind of keep the conversation going. I know there's a hashtag for this conference. It's another great way to keep the conversations going. Google+, post interesting articles, and I also write a blog. And I just spent 2 weeks on the road, on airplanes, doing a lot of writing, so there's a couple of posts that I have ready to launch for that. So great way to do communication and contact through those mediums. Kind of what I want to talk a little bit about today is where we are, what does technology in education look like, and for those of you who are thinking about how to do this, how to get started, we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, I always like to start with the idea of why we're in this room and why so many of you are passionate about education, as I am. And the reason that the slide doesn't work anymore is, I lost my slides. All right, while they're fixing the slides, while they're scrambling back there to fix my slides, one of the reasons why we're so involved in education is because we understand the power and potential of education. Education disrupts poverty, right? And education is critical to that disruption. And I know this because I am a first-generation American. As Andy mentioned, I was born and raised in Hell's Kitchen. My mother came from Argentina. I spoke Spanish. English is technically my second language. I showed up at PS 111, and they said, "Welcome to PS 111," and I said, "¿Qué?" and had to learn English. But through education, I was able to succeed, and I spent time working for the governor of New York. I worked at Accenture for a number of years, and now I'm at Google, and so I've had a pretty good career. But more importantly, I understand the disruption to poverty because of my 2 kids, right? So I have a 12-year-old and a 20-year-old. This is the part where you're supposed to say, I don't look like I have a 20-year-old. All right, so I have a 12-year-old and a 20-year-old, and my 20-year-old is in her 2nd year of college, and she never asked me if she had to go to college. I never told her she had to go to college. I never said, hey, you're going to college. She just assumed she's going to college because I went to college, because her mother went to college. She assumes she's going to graduate school because I went to graduate school. She also assumes I'm paying for it. But that's a good problem to have, right? That's the problem that we want. And so my kids are okay. I know they're going to be okay. I know that their kids are going to be okay. And my 12-year-old is already talking about what college he's going to go to. Right? So that's the disruption that we can do with education to not only my family, but to the community I live in and to society in general. Right? So that's the power and the potential of education and what we can do with it. Now, the issue is that this gap between those that are rich and those that are poor is actually getting worse. And we have to do something to stop that. If you look at a 4-year-old, by the time they go to school, a poor 4-year-old is 18 months behind a rich 4-year-old by the time they show up in school. That's something that we have to focus on and do something about. You look at low-income 4th graders, and they're behind academically in math than their rich counterparts. Even those that make it to college, right? You look at the bottom 30% of the economic quadrant in this country, and 30% of those kids are even applying to college, and only half of those are graduating, right? So this gap is getting worse, and we have to look at it and figure out how to solve it. And if you are a Latino in this country, and I'm obviously concerned with that community, we have to look at broader issues as well, right? So this is President Obama's promise a couple years ago, or kind of mandate, that we should become the #1 country in college graduates again, that should be our goal. And it's a noble goal, and it's a very good goal. The problem is that when we look at the numbers and think about this goal, for us to meet this goal, more than half of those graduates are going to have to be Latino, right? So when you think about that, and then you look at the fact that there's a 17.8% dropout rate for Latinos, and a 10% dropout rate for African Americans, and only a 5% dropout rate for white Americans, you can see that it's not going to be really that possible to reach that goal. There's only 13% of Latinos walking around in this country with a college degree or higher, right? 18% for African American. So these are the numbers that we're dealing with that we have to overcome. Now, at the same time that these are issues and things that we should be concerned about, I am extremely optimistic about the world and the future. Because for the longest time in history, where you were born, the family that you were born into, the resources at your disposal, and even the proximity to libraries had huge impact on your academic success. And this is no longer true. This has changed in our lifetime. I remember growing up in Hell's Kitchen, we had to use the library on 51st and 10th Avenue, the Columbus Library. And we all had to use this library. Everyone in the community, every school that was there, after school, that was the library that we used. And most of the time, the books and the resources that we needed weren't even in that library. Well, today, all that information is at our fingertips. And so we have to ask ourselves, how can we take advantage of that information at our fingertips? And at the same time, recognize that we also have to look at the digital divide and make sure that those that need it the most, that need the information at their fingertips the most, actually have access to that information. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple seconds. Now, we also have to recognize that this is not just a US thing that's going on. This is global. This is a global phenomenon. Out of the 2 billion internet users in this world, 1 billion are coming, half are coming from developing countries, like China and India and Argentina and Brazil and Mexico. Half of those are coming from developing countries. 73% of those that use the web don't speak English as their first language. Right? And so if you look at where web users are coming from, they're coming from these developing countries. And you look at these developing countries, and the web growth is about 25% year over year. And when you look a little bit deeper as to where that's coming from, it's coming from young people. I get asked all the time, what's the next disruptive technology that's coming? What's next? What's the next disruptive technology in education? And my answer is that it's not a technology at all. The next disruptive technology is young people and the expectations that they're going to have with their education environments. Right? These are the people that are going to be expecting a little bit more from what we currently offer in our education systems. And this is a picture of a classroom in India. And what I love about this is that they're doing a Google Hangout, and they're learning English. And the fascinating thing is that the teacher in the article talks about how all of a sudden, because he can do this Hangout, the information becomes more relevant, it becomes more engaging, more timely, more modern, as opposed to learning English from some 60-year-old book that they were using before, right? And what was funny to me was that the whole idea of relevance and engagement is a global issue, not just for American students, but we always have to make sure that our kids are engaged and that they find the information that we're giving to them relevant. And quality education is not just an American issue either. The world recognizes that education is their path to their economic future. I was in Peru and happened to be in Machu Picchu Pueblo, and that night that we were having dinner outside in their courtyard, they were, I don't want to say it was a protest, it was a rally for somebody that was running for city council. And everyone at this rally, and it was probably like 300-400 people at this thing, was wearing this shirt. And what I love about this shirt, for those of you who don't know what it says, it basically says, great change only comes through education. Right? And I spent time, before I was in Peru, I was in Colombia for a week at a Latin America education conference, talking to ministers of education from Colombia, from Dominican Republic, from Panama, and all these other countries, and they recognize it as well. Not only do they recognize that education is their key to economic success, they recognize that technology and the web is one way they're going to get there. Now, let's talk about education and why it looks the way it does today, just real quickly, because we have to understand why we are where we are today. And the first thing we always have to recognize is the fact that when we started this country, and basically this applies to lots of parts of the world, the country was basically a giant farmer's market, right? In the 1700s, 1800s, everyone worked in farming, and that's where our education came in. We worked, we did some basic education. Not a lot of people graduated from high school, but they had enough to be able to read and write and work on farms, and that's what our country was for a really long time. And then we got into World War I, and after World War I, the Industrial Revolution, or right in that same time frame, the Industrial Revolution, about 13% of Americans had a college degree. And that was okay, because a lot of the jobs were manual labor jobs, didn't require a lot of education, and that's how we were doing things for a really long time. And then after World War II happened, most of the jobs became industry-leading jobs like accounting and entertainment, and you needed some kind of additional education. And at the time, after World War II, about 20% of the jobs required some kind of college education, which was cool because about 20% of the population had some kind of college education. And if you see what happened during the 50s, the 60s, there was this economic boom where everything matched up pretty evenly. And then the 70s came, and the computer revolution that we don't really talk a lot about, but we don't pay attention to, but it changed the world, not just in the United States, but across the world, where all of a sudden, a lot of the manual labor, clerical labor, administration labor, those types of jobs were replaced by computing. And not only that, you can actually do this automation anywhere in the world. So it became less important to be in a specific country, because all you can do is transport things back and forth. So the computer revolution brought us this change in the 70s. And as we were trying to deal with this, then came the 1990s and where we are today. And so where in 1950, 20% of the jobs required some kind of college and some kind of post-secondary education, in 2010, 80% of the jobs required some kind of post-secondary education, but we only had about 30% of adults with college degrees. So you can see where things kind of fell apart and why education is where it is. And when you think about today, just as we were trying to catch up to the 1970s and the automation and the computers and all the things that were happening, the web came. And I always like to ask this question in the audience: how many of you today, just today, how many of you today have not used the web? There's a couple of you, because it's a big group, but most of us don't even recognize it anymore. We're on the web as soon as we wake up. It's like the new cigarette, right? We wake up and we light up right away. And our eyes are barely open and we're like checking emails, and right? How many of you do that? Admit it, right? All right. So we're on the web before our feet hit the ground. And this just happened in the last 10 years. Remember, we used to have to call the internet with our home phones? And the internet was rude. It would hang up on us whenever it wanted to. It would give us 5 or 6 different phone numbers to chase it down. That was 10 years ago, and that was our experience on the web, where it was rude and we had to spend time getting to it. And what was our reward for that? Our reward was pages filled with words that linked to pages filled with words that linked to pages filled with words. But we lost our minds. That was the most exciting thing in the world for us. But that was the web experience. And then somebody would walk into the kitchen and pick up the yellow phone on the wall and knock you off the web, and you'd lose your mind. And today, you get upset if your Wi-Fi on your airplane goes down at 35,000 feet, going 550 miles an hour. You're complaining about how slow the internet is on an airplane. Those are the expectations that we've set up for ourselves, right? And so think about what we do on the web today, and that's everything, right? The web becomes part of our day, even as soon as we wake up in the morning. And it doesn't make sense. It makes sense that education hasn't been able to keep up with this because it happens so fast, right? In just the last 10 years, the web has revolutionized how we do everything in almost every industry. And education is still trying to catch up to what happened in the 70s. So technically, there's nothing wrong with education. Education, the way it's set up, does exactly what it's supposed to do up to about 1970. So education's doing what it was made to do. Now the difference is that the world has changed, and we have to change education to match that world. And so when you think about you and how you use the web and how to utilize it, and the fact that you wake up and light up the web as soon as you wake up, imagine the next generation of kids that are coming into our school systems. Technology is not new to this generation. When you hand a kid your smartphone, they think that you've had that your whole life. They don't know that a smartphone is 5 or 6 years old. They just know it as a phone. And sometimes it's not even a phone. I don't think I've ever seen my daughter actually use the phone part of her phone. I don't even think she knows she has it. And so look at your device that you currently have that you're playing with right now, whether it's your tablet or your smartphone or your computer. Look at that device and think about how cool it is and realize that that technology is the worst technology a 5-year-old will ever see in their life. It's their Commodore 64. They're going to be 20 years old, and they're going to find your device in some thrift store, and like, oh, this is cool. I used to play with this when I was a kid, and they're going to bring it back to their apartment and hang it up on a wall like a museum piece. And so you have to ask yourselves, are we ready in education for this generation of kids? And the answer is obviously we're not that ready. This is a picture of my 12-year-old. I'm trying to be, a good, solid, patriotic American on a Sunday and watch football and be as lazy as I possibly can. And he's supposed to be watching football with me. So this is this past football season. And I'm sitting here, so I turn to my left and I see him doing this on a Sunday morning. What he's doing is, on one machine, he's playing this new game that he discovered called Minecraft. Yeah, I can already tell the parents in the room. There will be Minecraft rehab centers all over the country. So he's learning this new game called Minecraft, and on the other machine, he's watching videos learning how to play Minecraft. And he's gone from this to learning how to play Minecraft, to communicating, collaborating, problem-solving with other students playing Minecraft, to having friends all over the world playing Minecraft, to now creating videos of himself playing Minecraft so he can teach others how to play Minecraft, to now actually being a casino owner in Minecraft. And 3 weeks ago, I said, William, it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday, it's time to go to bed. He's like, I will, I have a couple of customers. And they're betting a lot, so I don't want to shut down yet. And so he's running 3 or 4 games in his casino, doing P&L lines on which games are better than others and what his profit margins are on the games that are good. And he's like, iterating these games based on his casino winnings, and now he's running a casino in Minecraft, right? And so this is the world that he lives in. I was in London in January doing an interview with the BBC. I did a presentation there, and I was talking to the BBC reporter, and we both recognized, we're talking about the future of education, and what it looked like we both recognized that both our kids were 11 years old at the time, and they were both using Minecraft. And so I said to him, naturally, like, hey, what server does your kid play on? Let me text my kid and figure out and then connect them, because I'm sure that they would get along and play. And in the middle of this, I recognized that I am doing global networking for my 11-year-old. And that's the world that we currently live in, right? And so we have to remember this. And this is one of the most important things I hope you get out of what I'm saying today, is that the world is changing, and our kids are learning in different ways, but it doesn't mean that they're any different than we are, right? You'll hear from speakers all the time who say, kids today are different. They're wired differently. They can multitask. No, they can't. They can only do one thing at a time, just like we can. But how they learn how to do things is differently. My 12-year-old is learning in a different way than how I learn how to do things. And that's really important to understand, because they're looking at the world from a different perspective. So they're learning in a different way. And they're doing it at any place, any time. They don't recognize Monday through Friday or this school or that school. Literally the day that school was over for my 12-year-old, he said, okay, literally the same day, he said, okay, now I need to learn how to code. I need to take this class. And before we went to Peru, he did about 3 or 4 weeks of Duolingo so he can learn some Spanish. Right? They don't recognize that their learning happens in a school day or from this day to that day. They recognize that it can happen any place, any time. And so that's how they do things today, and it's completely different than the way we did things. So when we think about the skills that these kids need, it's important to recognize that these skills are skills that we've been talking about for years. We just need to start applying them into education, right? And so one of the most important things is creativity. We don't live in that factory world anymore. We need kids to be able to be creative so that they can come up with solutions and define problems. Gordon McKinsey wrote a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And in the book, he talks about, the first kind of chapter, he talks about how he works for Hallmark, and he's a metal sculptist, and he used to go into schools and talk to elementary students, and he would say to the first graders, hey, I am a sculptist. I'm a metal sculptist, among other things, and I am an artist, and I do these things. How many of you are artists? And in first grade, every kid raised their hand. And he would do the same thing in second grade, and about half the kids raised their hand. Third grade, about 10 kids raised their hand. So that by the time he got to sixth grade, he would ask the same question, and maybe one kid would raise their hand. And if I ask you, and I'm sure you've been asked this question many times, or you've admitted to this falsely, when someone says, hey, are you creative? You say, no, I'm not creative. Brian's creative, I'm not the creative one. So what's happening? Either we as humans lose our creativity by the time we get to sixth grade, or it's being sucked out of us in sixth grade by the time we get to sixth grade. We have to build back creativity into our education systems, because we took it out for the factory jobs because we didn't need a lot of creativity. We need to put it back in for this new economy that we live in. Iteration is as critical as anything else. We need to teach our kids how to iterate. I don't like the word failure. We talk about how we need to teach kids how to fail. I don't like that word. There's something final about the word failure. I like the word iterate because it doesn't matter if you do something well or if you do something poorly, you have to continually iterate. We're in Florida. There's a lot of golf going on. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. There's a lot of golf going on. I try to play the game whenever I can, which is like once a year. But what I like about golf is the challenge of it. And one of my favorite expressions in golf is any shot that doesn't go in is a bad shot. And what I like about that is that it doesn't matter if you hit the ball 300 yards down the middle of the fairway, the next shot can hit the tree, or you can miss it entirely. So the last shot doesn't matter as much as the next shot does. We need to teach our kids how to iterate so that they become part of this culture where they're always improving things, they're always making things better, or they're always looking at ways to experiment and learn from that. And we need to be able to teach them how to iterate. We also have to recognize that curiosity is part of human nature and that we need to build that back into our classrooms. When teachers used to have to be the magic box of information, because it made sense, because even 10 years ago, if you ask someone, hey, what happened December 1941, and you didn't know, you would say, hang on, I'll be back in about 2 days. I'll go look that up for you. Today, that information is already at our fingertips. And so teachers don't have to be that black box of information anymore. They can actually be, they can play a different role. And so when my kids ask me a question, and I know they can look it up, I don't give them the answer. I say, listen, I work for a search engine. I'm not actually the search engine. Go look it up. And then it's my responsibility to follow up with them. What did you find? Where did you find it? Is it credible? How does it make sense? How do you apply it? And all the other questions that we have to ask. It is up to us to embed into our kids the desire to learn something deeply and not give them credit for something they can just look up, right? We have to recognize this shift in what's happening. Information is free. Information is cheap. Information is abundant. Intelligence is valuable. And our job in education is to help kids convert information into intelligence. And that's what we should be focusing on. We also have to make sure that we get collaboration right. We talk about collaboration all the time, and collaboration is one of those things that is an individualized, school is an individualized sport, and we live in a team-based world. And we take kids and we say, okay, take a test, do this, do that, graduate, all right, go work with others, good luck. And collaboration is more than just working together, right? Collaboration is understanding somebody else's point of view, having respect for somebody else's point of view. Collaboration is actually the ability to change your mind based on what somebody else says. And we need to be able to teach our kids that. Imagine as a 6th grader, you can hand out a test, and the kids are taking a test, and then at the end of the test, two kids come up to you holding the test, and they say, we did this together. What would your reaction be? When did collaboration become cheating? And how is it that we don't have to do the same thing? Can you imagine if I went to Larry or Sergey and said, here's the global education plan. I did it all by myself. I didn't include anyone. Nope, my parents didn't help me. Right? We expect to be collaborating. We expect to change our minds. We expect to be able to do that, and we have to be able to teach that in our schools as well. And we all have to make sure that we're creating problem solvers. So I grew up in Hell's Kitchen. Anytime I get a chance to talk to kids who are growing up the way I grew up, I take that opportunity. I can either do it via Hangout, I can do it at conferences, I do a whole bunch of different things, but I love to be able to stand in front of kids and talk to them about careers and what it's going to take. But the one thing I don't do, it's important for them to be able to see someone like me who is growing up, who grew up the way they grew up, and they can see that if I can do this, they can do this as well. But the other thing that I make sure I do is I don't ask them what they want to be when they grow up. I don't tell them that they should be doctors or lawyers or engineers. I ask them, what problem do you want to solve? What are you interested in? What are the problems that you want to solve? And then I say, now I challenge you to go back and get the education that you need to become an expert so that you can solve that problem. And I challenge them to go back into their schools and work with their teachers to say, hey, I think I need to develop these skills because these are the problems that I'm interested in. And once you learn problem solving and the techniques around problem solving, it doesn't matter what the problem is. Either whether you're trying to solve global poverty or whether you're trying to fix an engine. The process of learning how to become an expert in something and recognizing that you are never going to be a complete expert is critical in that idea. And so for a kid, especially a kid that's growing up the way I grew up, saying that you should become an engineer or saying that you should become a lawyer or saying that you should become something that they don't recognize might not make any sense to them. But if you ask them, what problem do you want to solve? What are you interested in solving? Then you can have them figure out what are the problems that they're interested in and the process to solving those problems, and that can be more critically. And we want to make sure that we're creating digital leaders. not just digital citizens. And what I mean by that is we have to get them to recognize that who they are, what they post online, what they share online, what they do online is the reputation that they'll have forever. And that we want to make sure that they're not just consuming information, that they're not just watching videos, that they're actually creating videos, that they're creating content, that they're actually becoming creators of the web and the resources on the web, not just consuming it. So like my 12-year-old who watches videos on how to play Minecraft, also creates videos on how to play Minecraft. And he recognizes the reputation that he's building as a 12-year-old in this space. My 20-year-old, I don't have the slide for this presentation because we just talked about it 2 days ago on our trip. She finally admitted to me that she's a film major, and one of the people that she watches on how to do film editing in Photoshop is done by like a 10-year-old. And so these kids are creating stuff now. We want to make sure that kids are creating stuff and that they're actually becoming part of that solution. Now we're finding this paradigm shift to the web, where this is starting to happen in many schools and probably in schools in your space. But one of the things that we have to pay attention to is what's happening in higher education and the idea around MOOCs. If you're not familiar with MOOCs, it's the massive online classes that are going on, like Coursera and edX and all these other organizations are providing these giant classes that are going on online. And what's important to recognize is that why that's becoming successful or why there's such a buzz around the idea of MOOCs is because we're in a perfect storm of things where access to the internet is available almost anywhere, technology and devices are cheap, the web is becoming mature enough to be able to utilize, and a generation of kids like my 20-year-old who are used to growing up on the web, who are used to using digital tools already, that combination of things creates an environment where it makes sense to do some classes online. And my daughter's taking some of her classes online, and she's doing some of these MOOCs as well. And so we're seeing this in higher education, and in K-12, what we're recognizing is that this is coming, but also that the teachers today are designing these future models. So the generation of teachers that we have today are basically determining what education is going to look like in the future. And you're starting to see some of this with problem-based solving, flipped classrooms, project-based learning. You're starting to see some of these things take hold in the K-12 space, and educators in K-12 are creating that environment. We're starting to see this in schools. This is a picture of a school in Paramus, New Jersey, and I could use probably 10 schools in Florida. I just didn't have time because I was in Peru. But if you look at this is a school that has about 15, Paramus in New Jersey has about 15,000 students. They have a 95% free reduced lunch population. 20 to 50% of their kids don't have any internet access at home. And they said enough is enough, and they decided that they were going to do something about it. And so now they're creating an entirely new culture in their school using the web as a learning platform, utilizing the tools that are available online so that they can actually create that culture in their school system that they need to create. We're starting to see the use of technology and tools to do personalized learning. And I don't mean personalized learning like, this is a question just for you, but the whole idea of creating e-portfolios and learning that is personalized to what you're interested in and the way we learn how to do things and how we want to make sure that the tools that are being created are advancing in that direction. And I'm starting to see lots and lots of tools like ST Math or Newton or other tools like that can or Khan Academy that can create that personalized learning environment for students. And the technology is just a tool, a solution to get you there. And we're starting to see collaboration happen across different schools, where I went to a school in South Carolina, Richland 2, and you walk into an elementary classroom and it takes you about 5 minutes to recognize where the teacher is, because the teacher is not standing in front of the room dictating and lecturing. The teacher's working with the different teams in the classroom that are all working on project-based learning, which is not hard, not easy to do, but they're doing it. And from a Google perspective, we have our tools like Google Apps for Education and Chromebooks and Android and YouTube, but we also have some other things, and we're going to continue to work in this space. I don't know if you're familiar with the Google Wonders project, where you can actually go in and see some of the world's wonders and learn about the different things that are going on in different parts of the world. And this is how we ended up in Peru, by the way. When you sit with a 10-year-old and you show him Machu Picchu, he talks about it for about a year until you finally book your trip and go to Machu Picchu, right? Or the Google Art Project, which is being able to visit almost every museum in the world and see art pieces at brushstroke level, right? And these are just two examples of tools that are available on the web and all the different things that we can do. And again, remember, you can look at a piece of art in any museum in the world and look at it at a brushstroke level, and 10 years ago, you were calling the internet with your home phone. So imagine what the next 10 years is going to look like and what's possible. And doing hangouts with astronauts. I was talking to my daughter who was wondering if I can set up a hangout with her and like 4 directors that she wanted to talk to. And the whole expectation that students have, which isn't just, let's watch a video of astronauts in space. A 5-year-old is going to expect to be able to talk and do a hangout with an astronaut in outer space. And so the expectations of students and being able to use these different tools in education is growing and learning. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that we're just getting started. Right? There's a website called the Chrome Project, the Google Chrome Project, and I would encourage you to go look at that and see some of the cutting-edge stuff that's being created with the technologies that are available today. And again, we're just getting started with HTML5 and all these other code-based things that we can do to create these unbelievable interactive websites and web tools that are just starting to get good at what we do. So when we think about this, some quick points about what do we do in education? How do we get started? How do we do this? The most important thing is in education, and when I talk to superintendents or ministers of education, the whole idea of creating this holistic approach. It's not just about how do we tweak education, but how do we redefine it? How do we start from scratch, and what does education look like, and what do we need to make it look like, and what's that holistic approach, and how do we recruit and retain the best teachers, and how do we make sure we create a culture of collaboration in our schools? That's kind of where we need to start with this and look at holistically, not just tweak education, not just use technology as something that automates bad education, because technology is just a tool. It's no different than the desk or the chalkboard in the classroom. It's just there to support and enable the education that you want to be able to provide. We want to make sure that the curriculum is based on things that are relevant and engaging to students so that we can create lifelong learners. Right? We want to make sure that they're learning the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they're going to need to thrive in the future. We want to make sure that we're developing great teachers. There was a Pew study, a research study, and they talked to about 2,500 NWP and AP teachers and about their use of digital tools, about their use of technology. And what was encouraging is that more than 90% of them were using the web, using digital tools, using technology as part of their curriculum, as part of what they're teaching their students, as part of what they were doing. But what was discouraging was that 85% of them were learning how to do this on their own, outside their normal day-to-day operation. So the professional development that we're doing for our teachers has to be focused on how do you help them build the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to thrive in a classroom so that their students can thrive. And so we want to make sure that the professional development for teachers are focused on those skills that they're going to need in the classroom. And we want to make sure that they're learning these skills because, again, we want to make sure that we're not growing the digital divide. Because in the same study, what you find is that 70% of the teachers in high-income school districts were using these tools in lots of different ways, but only 50% of the teachers in lower-income schools were using the tools in the same way. And so we want to make sure that we're not creating a bigger digital divide because because rich schools are using technology in the web and poor schools aren't. So we want to make sure we focus on that. And we want to make sure that you use the best technology that's possible, that's available to you, right? We don't build schools without electricity. We don't say, hey, we're going to build this new school, but we're only going to have electricity on the first and third floor. Or we're only going to have heating on the second floor. We recognize these as important things. We need to look at the web and access to the web as electricity. And we want to make sure that we can provide the best technology you can. And again, there's a question of funding, and there's a question of what you want to be able to spend your money on, and I get that a lot of schools don't have funding, but again, if we look at this as a critical component of what education is going to look like, we're going to be able to utilize these tools as much as possible. The critical thing here is to remember that this is not just happening in the US, this is across the globe. I talk to education ministers from all over the country, all over the world, and they talk about this as their #1 goal: access, access, access. And when you sit in the middle of the rainforest, like I did 2 weeks ago, and you actually have internet access, it's mind-blowing. And so lots of countries are focusing on this idea of access. Now at Google, we're interested in lots of different things around access, around video, around using our tools and all these different things. This is by no means an easy thing to do, right? This is a monumental changes that we're asking for. And in an ideal world, schools would be the great equalizer, right? Schools is where we could level the playing field, or what I call unlevel the playing field, because we actually have to add more resources and more things into some of the schools that we're working with. And so we want to make sure that these changes that we recognize that we're asking for are fundamental, they're hard to do. But 2 billion people online, 5 billion people still waiting to become online, the web and the access and what we can do with the web today compared to what we're going to be able to do with it in 10 years. If this is not the most exciting time in history and what the potential and the power is of what we can do in this space, I don't know what is. So I'm really, really excited. Thank you very much for having me here today. I promised that I wouldn't do this whole talk in Spanish. And I look forward to interacting, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.